you see Chinese
我
characters.
在许多奇怪的梦里见过你们，你们因缘际会走到一起，怀着各不相同的。
Okay.
One thing to preface here, right? So people who are familiar with Unreal 5 would know that there's the nanite system at play here. And the nanite system is a way to take highly detailed, like per pixel polygon 3D models and render them in real time without any issue. But one of the limitations to this nanite technology is that nanite rendered things are not interactive. So the thing to keep an eye on is the things that are going to be static objects or like set pieces that can't be moved would be using nanite, whereas objects that are going to be interactive will, like, say, physics driven, like things that sway in the wind, or things that have like dynamic tessellations or are animated will not be using nanite.
Yeah, and that extends for anyone who's familiar with animation approaches in game technology to shader driven animations, where you have, like, to perturb the vertex, and that's how a lot of you'll see a lot of like grass animation with the wind. That's usually done in a shader. That kind of thing nanite does not support.
Yeah, and so in that shot just there, we saw the bridge that was kind of moving around in the wind. And if, although we're not paused on it, if you had a keen eye for it, you may notice that the bridge itself has a lot less detail than the shot afterwards, which is like that sort of like steel with a bunch of probably Chinese historical figures or mythical figures on like a carved wooden backing. So that's the sort of thing that you can look out for when you're looking at this.
你欲成前人未竟之业，修功德圆满。你执着后世传颂之名，求位列仙班。你想跳出三界之外，得个清净自在。还有你无所挂碍，吃顿饱饭便善哉善哉。
Do you want to pause it here?
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So the thing that people look at this, I mean, and we'd heard a lot of the reaction stuff that we'd seen outside of our conversation was like, this looks amazing, and all the character design and all this other stuff. Sure. To be fair, let's qualify this and say this is our reaction to the current state that they're showing off. Where we are right now, looking at this, to me, the skin tones here feel a little bit, for the realism that's driven by the background and all of the other elements that got such fine attention to detail, the way the skin looks to me has it's lacking something that we've seen in other games, that from like even the PlayStation 4 generation of tech, where there is some a bit of subsurface scattering or kind of attention to the way the shaders work on the skin itself.
It's like more of a waxy look on the models than you would get with some of the more detailed shader detailed graphics, like as you're saying, things that have a more dynamic lighting system.
善哉，可我早就看穿了你们满嘴的情怀大义。
This is again what I was trying to hint at with the or describe when I was talking about the skin. This to me in particular feels a little bit I guess plasticky is the way, Justin, you put it, is appropriate here. There's something a little bit dry about it and not flexible. Like they put a lot of effort into giving him this person scars and whatnot, and they don't move the way skin moves. They don't animate the way. So it's like a lot of detail, but the more detail that you put into something like this, the more your eye picks up on the fact that it's not right.
Yeah, and actually this will be a theme. And I should be clear that I'm not trying to rip apart this game about the quality of it. We should put this in perspective here, which is A, there aren't a lot of Chinese game developers that aren't Tencent, like major studios, and there's only a few of them. China isn't really known for its AAA development. However, China is heavily utilized by the game developers in the U.S. and Europe and whatnot to outsource
In
asset
Japan.
development to get anything from tens of thousands of models that you may need for a game in assets. So the typical process here is that you have an American art team, say at Activision for I don't know Call of Duty. They would do all of the initial renderings, drawings, and whatever else, and that's something that gets sent to China to get models, textures, etc. And then it would come back to the U.S. teams where they would do finishing on the models and then implement it in game and modify the models as necessary to get it to function in their particular system.
Yeah.
So China as a country is awash with digital artists that can bust out this sort of fidelity that you're seeing in this game. But I think this is going to play in part to the sort of downside to what we're seeing, or some of the thing that you might be missing by just looking at the trailer and only seeing its graphic elements.
Yeah. Look at it and say, everyone has kind of got that initial shock of, wow, look at my eyes are bleeding from all the pixels and the prettiness and the fidelity. But we want to say like, okay, but let's look at this from an actual gameplay standpoint and look at the composition of these elements and find out what's going on here and where can things be improved before release.
Yeah, like it's almost as if you should expect a Chinese-based team to be able to create really compelling and beautiful visuals because that's how they're utilized by a lot of foreign teams. The question then comes into is like, are they going to be matching the fidelity and the visuals of their games to the sort of depths of technical prowess that you get in a more mature game market like the U.S. And developers from the U.S.
Also, to be fair, we should clarify that there are probably tons and tons of game developers in China as well. There are also socioeconomic reasons that those games may not make it out of China.
随着情怀大义，一心的侍从名利，唱什么命不由天，却不信自己才是天命之选。可悲的取经人呐、只要心中还有放不下的偶像，终有一天，他将化为修行路上无解的业障。
So the more complex systems that you'll see in a game are not necessarily the visuals of like a snowy background or particle effects and that sort of thing. These things are built into the Unreal 5 engine and managed as such, including the bats, which they showed in the Unreal 5 demo.
Yeah.
The more complex things are like, how does a character hit another character? And they've been very particular about how they show those details in the videos, in the last one and this one, minus the boss fight. And this is where I start getting suspicious. Like, when you're that specific to show like a 2-second clip of him hitting a dude in the butt and having him go flying over a cliff, it makes you wonder what the intent is behind that. Like, are they only showing that to show, hey, there are interactions, but not showing enough of it to show that the system that they have in place may not be as beautiful as the graphics rendering that they have, and so that would mismatch your expectations of, here's a very beautiful game that looks very much AAA, but an underlying game system that doesn't have the nuance that you'd expect from a AAA game, where you have
It's
lots and lots of engineers building super complex interactive systems.
right. It's like, what if you had a team of 1,000 artists and 2 programmers?
Yeah, and I'm not saying
and
that this is the case with them, but it makes me suspicious about what I'm seeing in these videos as they show off this game's progress.
right. And to be fair, they like one of the other things that I picked up on a similar vein there is that the interactions that they show, the actual combat that they show is one-on-one.
And to be clear, I would love to get a really good Monkey King game that
Yeah.
is done by Chinese developers that are more familiar and more probably reverent of the stories than the westernized versions that we've gotten over the years that are usually Western teams retelling a popular Eastern uh, story. So getting it from Chinese developers, getting their vision of what it is super exciting to me. But I'm
Yeah.
trying to temper my expectations of this game based on what I'm seeing in these trailers. I think it's classic like the things from RE4 or RE8 Village.
I haven't played that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like these weird things that reminds me of.
Yeah, and this is where I was talking about. So one thing that pops out to me here is the way the snow reacts and tessellates based on the character's movements. It pops rather than animates. And it looks so good, but at the same time, the way it pops in and out is a little bit distracting for me. I guess this is the spot where I was like, there's multiple people, and it shows some interactions in this way.
Actually, I'll pause right there too, and we can talk about the tessellation in a minute because there are some interesting things that are happening there. But the more, as you're saying, if you look closely at how the hits react in a game like God of War, there's maybe like 3 primary actions with the axe when you're fighting. So there's like a downward swipe, a backhanded swipe, and usually like I think a top down, like a tomahawk type hit. But when that happens and it animates, the enemies animate in the direction that the swipe is coming from. So a downward swipe will have the enemy falling in that direction. A backhand swipe will have the enemy going the other way. And so the complex reactions to the game system, even though they might be not 100% simulated or simulated at all, they have the nuance of the direction the attack is in is the animation that will play and blend into based off of that. Here, you see the more janky aspect of it where it's like a hit gets a generic reaction and it's not corresponding with the direction of the momentum of like the stick in this case, and that's the place where you're just like, okay, the nuance there isn't quite what you'd expect from a AAA title. And Gomi says the animations looks like something you'd expect from an Xbox One game, which I think that's kind of what we're saying here is like it almost seems like the underpinnings of the engine feels a generation behind, whereas the graphics feel like modern game graphics.
Yeah, or 2 generations behind even. With like this is next gen tech, and our previous gen was like Last of Us and what we were able to do there. Now that's like triple, almost quad A, but like that's top of the crop, cream of the crop, AAA. So maybe a little bit unfair to compare it there, but even stuff like Assassin's Creed and whatnot, with the scale of project that those are, they come through with more nuance. And if we're aiming for that tier of game here, and you said God of War, right? That's another one where this kind of is like a bit jarring when you're like, wow, so much detail back there, and then you hit an enemy and it's like, I'm playing an arcade game from the early 2000s.
Yeah, it doesn't have the nuance that you expect from the visual fidelity that you're getting.
There's a little pop. If you watch in the background, there is still a little bit of pop as some of the models appear.
But I will say the fidelity of the tessellation, or I don't know if you were talking about tessellation.
No, sorry. I saw something pop into the background, but yeah, the tessellation. Yeah, you were saying about the fidelity of the tessellation.
I have a feeling this is something that's part of Unreal. But even though there's some wonkiness to it, to be fair, in most games that use some sort of ground tessellation, there's a bit of wonkiness, but there is a level of detail that is kind of not seen. Different actions are causing tessellation to behave different. Like a sweep across it is doing like a low sweep on the snow cover, whereas like you see the sweeper hits as well that causes deeper tessellation. So this is a level that I have seen before.
Yeah, and it's that can be related to how they're just attention to detail and how they're animated. As I understand it, a lot of the way this works typically is you have one shader that handles this, or one shader. It's maybe as though it's that easy, where you write into a texture, and that texture is sampled for how deep the snow should be at that point, and you kind of fade it in and across in the area. What you have to do is, as an animation plays, you have to adjust that texture and the image effectively that the GPU is using to determine the height of the snow at a certain moment. And they just might be mapping that stuff really, really well to make it work this way. And and then leaning on the systems internally for how the snow looks, unless they've implemented their own snow system, which is possible as well. Yeah, it's almost strange too to see the reaction animations and whatnot not respond well, but like the snow adjusts so well.
If you were paying close attention, the way the hits were reacting is you had the audible like clank and like smash of like soft tissue. So you're like, okay, I hear the hit. You'd see the flash as well, but the animation, no reaction at all.
And I would say that it's really important that they have the stuff that they do, because that can cover up a lot of sin. Like the sound alone can make, in getting that feeling right and matching up and synchronizing right with the hit moment, can be huge. However, what they're also doing with that little flash of light when the hit happens is also potentially kind of covering up some of what you would otherwise see animated. So it kind of allows them to get away with it without having as good of an animation system. But at least for Justin and myself, as we're watching this and we're like wowed by the nanite stuff, and even the non-nanite stuff is just very, very beautiful, and well animated. It's well textured. Still, those reactions are the lack of them is suddenly felt almost more because of all the detail put in elsewhere.
喂，你看看，这大风大雪的，还要这么拼命，一定也是为了那个玩意儿。你来之前，我算过一卦，
I will say it's
你
super
猜猜
cool
写
to
的是啥？
see the
动不如
style,
定有财物，
this sort of mythical
只要送
beasts
死
and
也不
monsters
拦
and
你。
stuff like that. That I think to Western audiences are not that familiar, but
小西天土地
Yeah.
在此恭迎天命
mythology and
人。
imagery. It's nice to be able to see a game that sort of pushes for an artistic style and art direction that I think we're not used to in the West. It's refreshing to get that.
Yep.
Kind of reminds me of like God Hand in that way.
Here's the dragon. Yeah, right here is where it's just hitting it, and the dragon's just there's no adjustment to the animation at all. The little flashes here and there. That to me is more Monster Hunter.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Almost
there
dragons. What's that?
yeah, there are 2 times now that it hits the face where it does react as you would expect.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah, and it's almost as though maybe it's in a waiting point where it's like the phase of the boss is that it's waiting, and and when you hit it, it's like, okay, now I'll be able to react that way because I'm tired and I'm stunned or whatever. So they've canned the animation.
The heavy attack.
Yep.
And the reaction is consistent, right? It's not
Oh,
and,
to your point. Yeah, to your point, I just saw it like hit with the heavy from the right to the left, and the reaction went to the right, not the other way, which is what you would expect otherwise.
I mean, it's not the most uncommon thing. It's just
No.
It's more typical to older games that you see like a blend of classes and that. More nuanced animation at the time. When you a heavy attack hits the enemy, how does that animation?
This is my heavy response.
Right? Not directional. It did the same. Recoil backwards, not recoil.
Right. Which is what happened. They just did it again. Same exact thing. It hit from one side and the reaction was the other one. A counter to what you would expect. Actually, I just realized it. Okay, now I can see it. On the low level, it's almost like there's a lack of shadow happening when he was on the ground. The camera was low, and that, for that moment, felt a little weird, like that. Right? You can't see a shadow right now. But the camera pulled back, and there was a shadow. So I don't know.
还记得盂兰会上，世尊说过
The question I have is like, what's
众生
the
之
timeline on this?
苦，多因不守
When they
己
first showed it,
愿
it was
放
pretty
情
developed, at
纵
least for what they
欲。
showed.
要我说，
Yeah.
放屁！
But given what we're seeing here, the more complex interactions seems pretty far behind. So either this is getting close to
不杀生，仇恨
game position to be
无理生，
sure.
骨头大，
Still like you.
强弱如我何意？不邪淫，
Right.
一切
It may be that they're going
有
for
情
like
皆
he's
逆
doing，all of this. These
不
screen
妄
cuts, like
语
these
梦幻。
moments are all one boss that you're fighting. It's almost as though this game is doing a Dark Souls approach, right? Where the point of the game is to fight big bosses that are interesting. Or little
不
ones.
贪眠，无苦不得解脱，无纵欲，诸行了无生趣。
Usually, I think the more complex stuff that you see are animated video sections, which is where they have the ability to do more. But I think what we're really not seeing a lot of, and what is kind of suspicious here, is why are we not seeing more of the gameplay interactions? We've only really seen boss fights. We've not seen what like fighting the main guys, and whether or not you can fight more than one at
为
once.
何不败？
You're really seeing like these one-on-one interactions that I think are easy to polish specifically for slice videos.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm still interested to see how far away from final development this is, or if this is like really close to being done. Because visually, it looks like it's really close to being done.
Yes. Oh, totally.
All right.
We're being really nitpicky, to be fair. When something comes out at this fidelity, it's like you kind of have to be. But there was it's similar in a way to the way we were nitpicking at the not Unreal Halo, the Halo Infinite video when you and I did a reaction to the trailer for that when they first announced it. And like the tree pops, like the popping in trees and elements of it. And you're like, why would you showcase with this video? Right.
Yeah.
And there are elements here where it's like, oh, everything is so great.
It's like the reverse Halo, right? Where their graphics engine looked really lacking, but what they highlighted was their complex interactions, like being like, here's all the new cool things that you can do with Master Chief. Like you can grapple onto things and you can launch across, and look how dynamic this fight is with someone who's really good with the given system. So the Halo Infinite trailer, this multiplayer campaign that got heavily panned, was the interactive system was what you'd expect from Halo, the quality that you'd expect from a Bungie game in this case. 348?
343.
343, sorry. 343 Studios. But the graphics were just not what you'd expect from a premier next generation game. It was really looking like more like the last gen, and in some ways worse than that. So everybody's like, what's the deal? For this specific game, you're seeing the AAA nature of the visuals, and it's just like you can really be dazzled by how beautiful the game looks. But what you're kind of missing out on is like, wait a second, the gameplay itself looks like it's either really rudimentary or very much unfinished right now.
Yeah, from what they've shown.
Yeah, from what they show.
It's really hard to say, but when you look at the reactions and everything,
it's the same sort of thing that you look at when you see a game trailer and you're like, okay, let's look at this, especially like during like E3 when people are just rolling out stuff that's not even supposed to be done, and you look at the stuff that they show you. You nitpick it because you're like, you are being very selective about what you're showing and for how long you're showing it. Why is that? And most of the time is because it's not done, and this is the most that we can show you before it starts really looking really broken. And this is what sort of tipped me off with this game, was that visually it looks really amazing, but they're being very, very selective about what kind of interactive sequence they're showing. And what you can see from it seems very rudimentary and not matching the quality of the visuals.
Part of the balance that game developers have to have here is to not set the expectations too high, but to get the excitement as high as possible. And a lot of games, or I guess marketing teams, fail at that, where they get the excitement up really high, but then the expectations also go really high.
Yeah.
And to an extent, that's what we're potentially seeing right here, where the expectations of the visual fidelity may also be dragging the gameplay expectations up with it. And we don't know if we can stand with those expectations. So